Isaac, it's great to have you here. You have a very wide background. You have done the venture capital thing, you've done the startup thing, now you're doing the Techstars thing. We're very interested in getting sort of a broad perspective from you about your experiences with that. And I'd sort of like to frame the conversation around the thing that I've heard a couple of times from Techstars about team, market traction product, as, you know, sort of the Techstars-y mantra for who they want coming into their process. It's not clear to me that everybody here knows what a Techstars program looks like. If you could sort of introduce yourself and then introduce Techstars a little bit and then dive right into the conversation.
Sure, great. Well, thanks for having me, John. And I have to say hello to John Dex. Our children are graduating from Interlake High School this Friday, and it's been quite a journey. So congratulations, John. And we need to catch up regardless. Can I share my screen, John Sechrist? Let's see here. And can you all see this? And let me present this. Okay, can you see these slides or this slide? Okay, cool. Great. Well, thanks everybody for inviting me to join you, and excited to chat with you about my perspectives. I should say I put together a few slides with a good emphasis on the team stuff. I'm happy to cover the broader Techstars investment rubric, as well as share some of my own thoughts about angel investing. And throughout it all, I'll try to weave in the experiences I've had both as an investor and as an operator. I should say that I'm here speaking on my own behalf as an individual. Obviously, I do represent Techstars, though, but a lot of the things I'll tell you today are my own perspective, and certainly managing directors across Techstars are by no means a homogeneous group. We all have our own particular ways of looking at the world and particular interests. So the team market traction idea framework that John mentioned is kind of the baseline, but we all have our own specific ways of evaluating companies. So as John said, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've started 2 companies. I've run 3. My first company was a 3D graphic software business that was we raised a good sort of healthy dose of angel capital, and then we were acquired by a public CAD company. My second company was a data center business that I started in Iceland and ran for 10 years. And during that time, I raised about $200 million of debt and equity for that business. And then after 10 years, I stepped aside. But that's today a big, growing, and profitable data center business in Iceland. My third company, I was recruited to be president, and this is what brought me to Seattle, but president of a machine learning business that was venture-backed, called Mighty AI, and I was brought in as president, and one of its leading. I knew a bunch of their backers, including the Foundry Group, a guy named Brad Feld, and his partners. I'd done business with on a number of occasions, and they brought me in, and that company was acquired by Uber. And as I was leaving that, the managing director job at Techstars opened up, and Foundry and Brad are the lead investors in Techstars, and they basically said, "We need you to start this job on July 17th, 2019." And I didn't have anything better to do, so I said, "Sure, I'd love to." I was also a VC for about a decade, and I've invested across all stages, ranging from truly de novo companies that I started as an investor, through seed and Series A and B and C and D, and even a small buyout. So I've invested across the capital stack and across stages. My last job, I was principal at General Catalyst Partners, which many of you may know. It's a big national firm. So I've been on both sides of the table, and I think that's helped me to be a better investor as well as a better operator. Sounds like the audience is composed of a good mix of both founders and angels and people who are wearing both hats. So I'll try to I'll try to address the topics tonight from both perspectives, but by all means, please interrupt me and ask questions. I really don't want to just talk to you all for talk at you for an hour and a half. Let's make this as interactive as possible. Interrupt me. By the way, a lot of these are my own personal opinions. If you hear something that doesn't make sense, by all means, question me. Okay, let's make it interesting. So anyway, thanks for having me. And here, let's jump in. I think I heard what people want to talk about, but anything else anybody wants to cover or hear about before I jump in? Okay, then I'll go. Okay, so I'll start off by talking about the framework that John mentioned at the beginning. This is a very publicly stated thing that we talk about all the time when we're recruiting founders to come join Techstars. Oh, I forgot to tell you what Techstars does. So Techstars, if you don't know, is a venture accelerator. It's one of the biggest global venture accelerators in the world. We have 50 programs around the world at this point, and we're one of the sort of most established players in the industry. Each program every year takes 10 companies. Actually, it's going up to 12 soon, but 10 to 12 companies per year. And we put them through a 13-week, very intense program. But we stay attached to them more or less for life. We are early stage investors, and that we take stakes in our companies and stay closely involved with them throughout. Well, basically, as long as they want us to be involved. We take a very local approach, so that the Techstars accelerators will be either city programs like the one that I run here in Seattle, or they'll be vertically. And the city programs like mine tend to be kind of segment agnostic. So we look at all different types of tech startup companies. And then we have corporate sponsored accelerators that tend to be more vertically themed or specific in nature. So for example, we have healthcare accelerators, we have social impact accelerators, fintech, pick a sector, there's probably a Techstars accelerator trying to address it. So anyway, we wind up putting now about 500 startups through the global network every year. And again, we try to add value throughout their life cycle. When they come into the program, what I always say is our main value prop to the founders, we dramatically take up their odds of success in their entrepreneurial journey. So if you think about the typical startup math, most startup companies fail. Most Techstars graduates achieve some degree of success, and then some achieve a lot of success. And Seattle in particular has been a very successful program in the coming up on 13 years that we've been running. To collectively, the alumni from Techstars Seattle have raised about $1.5 billion at this point. Now, of course, there are a few companies that have earned the most of that, but and we have 3 bona fide unicorns whom you've probably heard of: Outreach, Remitly, and Zipline. The latter two, the first two, are now valued $4 and $5 billion respectively. But we've had plenty of companies that have raised their A's, their B's, and their C's. And when I look at my first class that came out in 2020, right in the heart of COVID. Despite the tough circumstances, 8 of the 10 companies have now raised really solid pre-seed or seed rounds. 9 of the 10 are still going, which is great. This latest cohort, which finished recently, is off to a great start as well. And so, how do we help our companies? To deconstruct it a bit, we are a mentor-driven accelerator. So one of the first things we do is connect our founders with usually 3 to 5 lead mentors. These are typically serial entrepreneurs themselves, or their subject matters in an industry or a function. And the Seattle Mentor Network is really, really strong. And so we can usually connect our founders with 3 to 5 top-notch mentors, the type of whom they're not normally going to have access to. There's certainly a big educational component to it. We do a bunch of workshops throughout, and then we really try to blow out the founders' networks, both in terms of investors, but also prospective customers, potential employees. And that network expansion comes from my own Rolodex, to use an outdated phrase, and as well as the mentors. And then Techstars Central does a really good job of providing access. So for, particularly if you're an under-networked founder, it's kind of life-changing in terms of the access that all of a sudden you get by having virtue of gone through Techstars. It's a highly selective program. Typically, hundreds of people will apply for a given cohort, and we'll only take 10 or now 12. And then we spend the last third of the program really trying to train our founders to become great fundraisers. I would guess that a quarter to a third of the people who come through Techstars Seattle are there because they tried to raise capital on their own and failed. And so we really try to help them learn the entire process and build the muscles to be better fundraisers. And then we connect them with I mean, literally thousands of investors. So that's what we do in a very, very brief nutshell. Any questions on that, by the way? Okay.
That's a good question.
Yes, go ahead.
How different is Techstars than something like Founder Gym?
I don't even know who Founder Gym is. There are scores, if not hundreds, of accelerators of all shapes, flavors, and sizes. The two biggest are YC and Techstars. There are a lot of accelerators that are non-equity accelerators. There are some that will run for much longer periods of time with less intensity. And a lot of them, again, will be sort of very thematic. So there's like a very high quality one in Boston around EdTech. There's StartX, which does life sciences down around Stanford. But there are, I mean, it is a very competitive market, just like all the investor markets are at this point in time. So there are hundreds of accelerators around the world. There's even a global accelerator network that is almost like an industry group that connects all the accelerators in the world. So if you're thinking about joining an accelerator, it's good to kind of talk to a whole bunch of them and get a feel for what they do and what they are. They all have different value propositions. And then even within Techstars, I always tell founders, it's really important to get to know the different MDs of the programs you're considering, because while we have a lot in common, we also very much have our own particular interests, biases, and skills and things we bring to the table. Sorry, I can't give you a direct conversation with Founder Jim. I just don't know who they are. Okay, so anyway, when we give this talk about, hey, how do we decide on what companies to bring into the program? We'll always say the first three factors are team, team, and team. And then we want to know about your market opportunity. We want to know about your progress, which is a nice way of saying we want to know what your traction is. And then your idea, which is sort of how are you tackling whatever problem it is that you're trying to solve. But we really put a big emphasis on team. So let's talk about that for a second. So why do we put team first? So to be clear, it's not only team, okay? I often hear people ask the question, like, as an early stage investor, what do you care more about, team or market opportunity? And my answer is, well, I care about both, okay? I really want to invest in great teams that are going after big, explosive market opportunities. I don't really want to invest in a company that's just got great founders but no market opportunity, or a company that's got mediocre founders that are going after big opportunity. I want both. And more. I want those two things, and I want a great idea, and I want to see lots of traction, so like we all want more. But if you made me pick my number one priority, I do start with team, and the reason why is, well, there are a number of reasons, but it's really kind of the one thing that you can control and you can manage in an early stage startup. You can only influence your market to a certain extent. Obviously you'll pick your market opportunity, but a lot of times you're guessing about whether or not it's really going to be good, or whether or not you can disrupt it. And but the one thing you can control is, hey, am I backing good founders? Or as far as I can tell at this stage, are they great founders? Will they be able to recruit? Will they be able to build a high performance organization? Because the thing is, if it turns out, let's say, that the market opportunity that they're initially going after isn't great, well, good teams will be able to pivot, and they'll survive pivots, which are quite traumatic in a lot of cases, but they'll often find a way. They won't always find a way. I mean, I've seen plenty of great teams fail to capitalize on their market opportunity, and but nonetheless, it's the thing that's controllable. And we're investing in very, very early stage companies. Usually they're approaching MVP, and sometimes they'll have maybe a few $100,000 of trailing revenue, occasionally more than that, but they're very early stage companies. And so pivots just tend to be part of the game. And if you don't have a good team, chances are they're either not going to see a pivot opportunity or they're going to fail to be able to survive it. I mean, pivots are usually pretty traumatic when they happen. So it takes a quality team to be able to do that. And I'll talk about what I look for in a team in just a minute. But there's plenty of empirical evidence, certainly even in Techstars Seattle, about the importance of quality teams. And the best one is probably Outreach. Outreach, effectively, they pivoted multiple times, and they pivoted into their current version of the company, which is the unicorn version, many years after they graduated from Techstars. And they survived all that because the team was so tight and they were such a capable group that they were able to go through it and ultimately find the thing that has led to their success. So that's why we put team first. But again, it's not that I only want team. I want a great team that's going after what we think is a big, exciting market opportunity. And if they have some traction, that's even better. And if they have a great business model and a great, approach to how they're going to solve the problem, even better. But if I have to prioritize, I put the team first. Any questions before I get into what I look for in a team? Anybody think differently? I'll tell you, Sequoia, the arguably most, actually not even arguably, by far the most successful early stage investor in the world, really doesn't put team first. I think they look for interesting market opportunities. Again, not that they don't care about team. Of course they want great team, but they will not hesitate to replace a management team if they think the management team has run its course. We don't have that luxury at Techstars, and you will not likely have that as an angel, where you're mostly along for the ride, and we certainly are as well. Like, we don't have any control provisions in our investment documents. We don't take board seats, so any influence that we exercise in the company is purely soft influence and encouraging them or trying to give them guidance. But we can't make the founders do anything. Cases like Sequoia, they'll typically have more control capabilities than an angel or even or Techstars will have, and so they can probably take that point of view. But they won't hesitate to replace founders who aren't who've run their course. Now, again, all that said, they still want to find great founders, of course, and I am sure they have examples, but I bet there are not too many where they just completely forklift replaced a team and then saw that company go on to great success. I tend to think that it's certainly from my own experience, when you have to rip a founding team out of a company, you wind up killing its soul to some degree or entirely. I've never seen a company where we just ripped all the founders out. And I have been part of that, where you rip a founder out and then the company goes on to great success. I've seen them kind of recover and turn out an okay outcome, but not a huge one. So again, but I'm sure they're based, by the way, anything I say at this point in time, you'll find counterexamples. So I'm giving you broad generalizations. Any questions?
Hey, Isaac.
Yeah.
One question. So you talked about traction and or progress in another word, as well as you talked about early companies. So do you have any kind of min-max you look for as far as funding for companies, or kind of boxes you look for as far as traction? Because obviously different kind of growth stages of a company are going to have different kind of characteristics with
that. Can we put a pin in that question and bring it up in a few slides? Let me get through the team stuff first, and then I'll talk about traction and that min-max question. Okay. And if I don't address it or if I forget, remind me. But I think I'll probably remember that. Okay. Any other questions?
So when we do open coffee, it's sort of a surprise to some of the founders that they need a founding team, and they think about it as employees or people that can do what I can't do, but not necessarily a team, right? They're thinking of bodies that can do work for them, as opposed to how do I build a founding team that is committed, heart and soul to this idea getting out there. And so we run this, or we have in the past run Startup Weekend, which helps us sort of build some team muscles. Can you think of ways that you might take one of these proto founders that's thinking that their idea is the greatest and all they need is to contract someone to do a little bit of finance and then they're done, and get them to understand what it really means to have a team that's committed to the journey?
Boy, John, I don't know that I have like a magic wand or like never fail playbook for how I convince someone of that. And to be honest, if I feel like it's gonna take a ton of convincing, chances are I won't pick that founder or that co-founding team. Like if they're not committed to hiring great people and building a high performance organization, I probably don't want them. And there are plenty of founders like that, but I've certainly seen plenty of companies fail to achieve their potential because they refuse to hire, or they refuse to hire good people. It definitely holds companies back. So now there are plenty of times where you have a founder who's willing to do whatever it takes. They just don't know what it looks like. And that comes through, a long-term coaching kind of thing and showing them examples of other successful companies where, hey, the founder's really good at one thing, but not at another, and they need help. And they're not going to get it by hiring, B's or C's or just, junior, individual contributors. So I don't, all that said, I don't encounter too many founders like that. Sometimes you have someone who thinks they want that, but then they don't really do it. And then it's again, a series of long conversations. I also, by the way, will oftentimes work with my companies in the hiring process. So if they want me to, I'll actually interview their final candidates and, point out who I think can scale. But I definitely don't have if someone is just dead set on only hiring doers and not building a real team around them, the odds of me taking them are very low.
Okay. I see Megan has put a question in the chat. What do you think are the first 3 to 4 most important hires generally?
Gosh, it totally depends on the makeup and DNA of the founding team. It's usually whatever you don't have as a founder or a founding team. I will say, after giving my whole speech about having founders who are expansive in terms of their thinking about the team they want to build, I actually generally don't think people should be hiring VP or C-level people in those first few hires. You should be hiring doers at that stage. So you might have co-founders who are C-level people, but I don't generally think it makes sense. I really hate it when I see a really early stage company that's got VP row where 5, 6 of the first 10 employees are VPs, because it tells me that they don't have a lot of thoughtfulness about how this company is going to grow, and also they run the risk of not having enough doers. So you still have to do a bunch of stuff. So I mean, look, I often will, if someone doesn't have, unless a BDR is a very typical hire, at least for a B2B oriented company. Obviously, someone has to be a builder on the team. Even if you have a contract development at the earliest of stages, eventually someone's got to be able to build or lead the development process. But Megan, I don't think that there's a single formulaic first stage hire. It's so much a question of what is the founding team good at, or what is the founder good at, and where do they need help? And generally speaking, it's not until after either a healthy seed or a Series A that you start to bring in senior leaders. So What's my recommendation to solopreneurs or founders who haven't found the right senior team members? Senior who are engaged in the vision market that the company. Okay, so I used to have a pretty strong bias against solo founders. I have expanded my view and openness to solo founders quite a bit in the last year or two. Now, by the way, let me say that regardless of what I think, there's a very strong bias against solo founders in the institutional market. So when you go to actually talk to institutional VCs, it is typically a lot harder to raise capital as a solo founder. It's not impossible. It happens all the time, but it's just harder. And hey, Don, we can hear you. I think we can hear your snacks. What I would say is, even for me, like I'll take solo founders. I had 4 or 5 solo founders in the last cohort, and they've done really well in terms of fundraising. So despite that bias against them, but they all had the ability to show that they could build. So they had, in a couple cases, contract developers, or they themselves were developers, but they showed they had the ability to build and the ability to sell. So this is a good segue into what I look for in a team. So I am much more open to solo founders than I ever used to be, because I've now seen people find success. But all that said, I also see solo founders struggle more than well put together co-founding teams. Like, being a founder sucks. It's really hard. It's very, very lonely. And having a teammate or two who, as a co-founder, will make your lives collectively so much easier. So one piece of advice that I will often give to solo founders is, you can think about bringing on a co-founder later in the game. Co-founder is a very malleable term. When I was truly the solo founder of my data center business, but I brought in 2 data center experts, 9 months or so after we'd started the company, and we gave them co-founder titles because the business was not going to get off the ground without them. So that's a very fluid term, and I wouldn't be so sort of rigid about who gets that title. But a good example of a solo founder who just came through the last Techstars cohort is Erin at Pear Tree, and she found a CTO candidate right as the program was starting, and she gave him a co-founder title. And so, I would strongly recommend thinking about bringing in a co-founder, even if it happens 6 months or sometimes even later than the true founding of the company, because your life will be better. And what does that mean? I mean, again, there's no hard and fast definition of what co-founder is, but a co-founder is basically someone who I deeply trust, someone who I can truly share, everything with, as opposed to, say, my team. Because if you're the co-founding CEO, your job first and foremost is to lead your team, and that means that if you're having a lousy day, you can't just break down in front of them and say, "I'm having a really horrible day, and I'm just, I feel awful, and I think this business is going to fail." It's just not something I think is particularly wise to do as a leader. With a co-founder, you ought to be able to have a very open conversation about how you're doing, how the company's doing, and mutually support each other in the journey. And so the co-founder certainly got to be, as bought into the vision as or equally bought into the vision for it to really work well. But I guess that's my other advice, Shaiwal, about what solopreneurs should do. If you're not going to bring in a co-founder, make sure you have a peer network of other founders and or advisors or people who you can really turn to, particularly in the dark times, for just support. Okay.
So Isaac, based on what you just
said, I see a note from Jane asking, what are some of the red flags that trigger your spidey sense when you're meeting a founding team?
Oh gosh. The opposite of everything that's on this page. Okay. So I'll go through this is what I look for. And by the way, I look for, particularly for Techstars, I look for a very specific archetype of founder that's quite different than another different type of architect founder that's been very successful. So you see one of the things I look for is founders who have humility and a desire to learn. Okay. I think there are plenty of great founders who do not have that characteristic at all, or are certainly not humble. They might want to learn, but they're not humble. And the example that I always bring is somebody like Travis Kalanick, who is arrogant as hell. But you know what? There's a certain amount of success that comes with it takes a certain amount of look. You have to be confident as a founder, and that line between arrogance and a healthy amount of confidence is it's a fine line. And there are plenty of extremely arrogant founders. Mark Pincus at Zynga is another good example. I mean, I think you have to say the same with Steve Jobs, who are incredibly successful. They're just not the type of founder I'm likely to bring, certainly into Techstars. Now, there's something very specific to Techstars about that, which is that I'm building a cohort of 10 companies who have to work together. So someone like that is going to be toxic to the other founders. We're trying to build a cohort of 10 companies that really support each other. And fundamentally, if you're coming to Techstars, you're coming for mentorship and for the education, which means that you want to learn. And you're only going to learn if you have a degree of humility about things. But there are plenty of VCs who happily back the Travis Kalanick's of the world. And I might do it as an individual angel where don't have to put this person with other people. But the thing for me personally is I just don't like to work with people like that. It's just it's not as much fun for me. So that's something. But again, that one is a very personal bias. Okay. If co-founders are still working at other jobs and will move to the startup after raising fund, is that a red flag for Techstars? Yes, it is. So one of the things I have up here is commitment. I only want to back founders that are full-time committed to a venture. And I struggle with this one because I realize that creates a bias against people who are coming from an economic circumstance where they just simply do not have the wherewithal to go full-time into a startup. It biases against people who have some sort of caretaking obligation, whether it's parents or kids, who simply have a life that does not permit them to go all in on a startup. And I struggle with it because in some ways it doesn't feel fair to me, but I am an investor. I'm trying to make a return on my capital, and I just don't have any examples of part-time founders who've gone on to build really, really valuable companies. I'm sure they're out there, but they're certainly the very rare minority. And so what I would say to them is, hey, stay in touch, do that until, do your part-time, do this as a side hustle until you get to the point where the company's far enough along, or you have the funding or the confidence to jump in full time. And in the meantime, stay in touch. I will take founders who commit to go full time as a result of where Techstars is the trigger to do that. But once they're in Techstars, they got to be full time. Otherwise, I just won't take them. Were you gonna make a comment? No. Okay.
So Ali went on to say, so it's better to start Techstars as a solo entrepreneur and then add co-founders as they get committed.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, I definitely have. Yes, I will certainly take solo full-time founders who have people who are doing their thing with the company as a side hustle, and if they ever raise a seed round, they come on full-time. That's okay. But the founder's got to be full-time, and I really use that as I also use that as a litmus test to assess whether I think the company's, a good idea in the first place. And again, I realize that this creates a bit of an unfair bias against certain demographics, but if you're not willing to go all in and full time on your thing, how bought in are you? Okay. And the example that I give is my own personal example, which is starting this data center business. I left my very cushy venture job to be a startup founder for the second time because I had such a burning need for this company to exist, this data center business, I would lose sleep over it. I was so excited about it. And it was one of these things where I said, I kind of knew, hey, if this doesn't happen, if I don't see this to, its instantiation and its realization of a real business, I'm going to spend the rest of my life wondering if I should have. And that's how how important it was to me. And that's kind of the level of commitment that I want to see in founders, because I think if you don't have that burning drive to see your thing succeed, its odds of becoming a big success are dramatically reduced. Sorry, Jane, it seems to me now in the remote virtual world, I'm meeting more teams that are all over the globe. What do you think about building a team when everyone is in different time zones, possibly very different cultural backgrounds? I think it's early days, but I think it's the way to do things. My second and third companies were, and this goes back to 2007, were remote from day one. Vern, the data center business, was remote. We had teams in Iceland and the US at the very beginning, and then it was Iceland, the US, the UK, and Germany when the company is still very young. And I think you ought to be able to figure out, I think it's harder. There's certainly overhead to managing a remote team, but from a cost standpoint, from day one, you ought to think about putting at least certain aspects of your business in low cost environments. Like, I don't think it makes sense for most businesses to build a big engineering team in a tier 1 city these days. It's just stupidly expensive. So I think it's okay. I think it's hard for sure. You have to be really thoughtful about the potential culture clashes that'll happen. You have to think hard about how are you going to deal with the different time zones. But I think if you're smart about it and you put the time and the effort and the investment into the systems and the processes and getting together as a team in person on a pretty regular cadence, it's well worth doing. I certainly have no bias against it. No question, it's easier if the kernel of the starting team is right there all together in the same place. There's no question that helps productivity, but I've seen plenty of productivity from fully remote teams for several years now, so I think it can be done. Okay, so what do I look for in teams? Do you have a question? Or no? Okay. Yes? No? Okay. What do I look for in teams? Look, I want people to be brilliant. There's no question. I want to learn from them. I want them to dazzle me with their insights and the things that they see and their view of the world. That creativity is sort of buried in there. Resilience is such a key thing. Again, doing a startup is brutally hard, and it takes physical, emotional, and sort of intellectual stamina to make it through as a startup founder. And I've seen plenty of founders break on the shoals of lack of resiliency. It's an emotional roller coaster, and you can't help but ride it. But teams that don't figure out how to manage through that roller coaster have a much lower chance of succeeding if they can't handle it. And so what do I look for in terms of resiliency? I love it. I love people who've been competitive athletes. I love people who come from some degree of hardship. One of the reasons why I really like investing in diverse founders is because in a lot of cases, they have had to jump through much greater hoops than the average founder, sort of the average what's the word I'm looking for? The average, the typical kind of pedigreed founder has to jump through just to apply to Techstars. And so I'm always looking for people who have had to struggle to get to where they are and have overcome those struggles, because I think they're more likely to have the psychological makeup to succeed as founders. I already talked about commitment. Founder market fit is a really, really big one for me. So what do people understand that phrase, generally speaking? Sorry, John, I can't.
Probably not.
Probably not. Okay.
Probably not.
Can you explain what that is? I'm not sure I follow that.
Of course. Okay. So what I mean by that is the founder or founding team well suited to be going after the problem that they're trying to solve. Okay, there are a lot of startup tourists who come across an interesting idea, and they're kind of dilettantes. I'm looking for people who really deeply understand the problem they're trying to solve, either because they've been a customer who struggled to find the thing that they wanted, or they were a vendor who saw that the market just wasn't delivering on things that they were hearing from their customers. But they should have a really deep insight and understanding and commitment to the market that they're going after. And I'll give you again a great example. Is this is Erin from Pear Tree. So Pear Tree is an adoption marketplace. Erin herself is a 2-time adoptive parent. She has deep empathy for both sides of her marketplace, both the adoptive parents and expectant mothers. And she deeply understands their psychology, who they are, and how to talk to them, how to message them, and what they're looking for in product. Like, that's really good founder market fit. Amira Rasul is the founder of the Folklore, who also just went through my cohort. She's a lifelong sort of fashion aficionado. She got really interested in African designers. She moved to South Africa for a number of years to go and travel around the continent and meet designers and learn about the market. Like, that is someone who is deeply committed and deeply understands. Oh, and while she was doing it, she was writing on a freelance basis for some of the biggest fashion magazines in the world. That is someone who's deep into the problem they're trying to tackle. So I really like to see that founder market fit. Team for an early stage company, you got to be able to build and you got to be able to pitch. Now, you don't have to be expert in both, but I'd love to see strength, real strength in at least one, and ideally both. Like, the ideal configuration is I do like it when I have a co-founding team where one person's the builder and the other person's the salesperson. That's like a classic founding team dynamic for Techstars. If you can't, let's say you're not a builder, but you really understand the market from the business side. You got to show me that you have been able to at least build up a prototype using contract developers. And if you remind me to talk about that when I get to the traction part of the talk. But you got to be, quickly you have to be able to do both. And we try to teach people to do these things, particularly on the pitch side. It's really hard to teach someone in 13 weeks how to build. If you don't have a basic sense of how to build product, you're probably not going to make it. But, I've certainly backed teams that were technically very, very deep and who really weren't good at pitching and selling. And they always have a harder time. They will go slower. I try to help them, but it takes time. If there is a team, I really want to see strong co-founder and team dynamics. A good number of companies blow up just because the co-founders wind up not getting along. So it's better if they have a history of working together. I certainly spend a lot of time asking them questions around, okay, how do you resolve conflict? How did the two of you deal? What was the last big fight you had as founders, and how did you resolve it? If you truly reach loggerheads, who makes the decision? Who makes the call? And so I'm looking for a team that, number one, is mutually supportive, but also is capable of having hard conversations, of challenging each other, pushing each other. Ideally, they have complementary skills, deep respect for each other, that kind of stuff. Resourcefulness, it kind of ties into resiliency, but you can clearly see teams that do more with less, and you can see teams that just kind of, for lack of a better phrase, who just kind of fart around. And I like people who just go and solve problems, and when you talk to them, you point them at something, or a possible solution to one of their challenges, and the next time you talk to them, a day later, they figured out how to do it. They've pulled together the resources they need and they've solved it. That's a huge part of being a founder. Like, you've got to be resourceful. You've got to be able to figure out in uncertain situations where you have limited capital, how do I get what I need done? Ambition, vision really go together. Particularly for Techstars, we're looking for venture scale companies. So if you don't have a big ambition and a big vision for what the company wants to be in 5 to 7 years, my concern is that you're going to build a nice small business, which can be great. It's just not what I'm looking for at Techstars. I already talked about humility, desire to learn, and then something very specific to Techstars is a give first attitude. So if you haven't heard about that, at Techstars, we really we have a fundamental ethos. It's maybe the single most important core value, which is that we really try to help people out without any expectation of immediate reward or compensation. So we look for founders who have that attitude because, again, we're putting together a cohort of 10 companies and we want them to help each other out. It's not 10 individual companies. It's one cohort of 10 companies. Okay, I see a couple of other questions here. Let's see, John, this is just a comment. Founder market fit implies founders enmeshed in the market. So yes, well said. So far better than I said it. How do I view companies that have a lot of advisors that may convert to becoming co-founders? I don't know. There are a lot of companies that show up with advisor brag sheets and like, look at all the great advisors I have. And my response is, well, that's great, but they're not running the company. And one thing I really believe is that, as much as investors like me can help companies, it is on the founder to find success. It's the people who are there full-time in the trenches, making it happen, who drive a company's success. And yes, every now and then an advisor or investor will make a big impact on a company with an introduction or a sound piece of counsel, but it's really the founders on whose shoulders the success resides. So yeah, if the advisors are really strong and relevant and they are committed to coming on at some point, that helps. That's great. I need to know for sure that it's really going to happen. But maybe I'm answering a slightly different question, Ollie, but just because someone shows up with some really impressive sounding advisors, it really doesn't matter too much to me because advisors aren't running the company, and there are plenty of advisors who are not actively engaged with a company and who are there just for optics. So yeah, as John said, they're not committed. Yep. Okay. So any other questions about team? Otherwise, we can move on to other stuff.
Isaac, one question.
Yeah.
You talked about cohorts in Techstar. So in a way, that's functioning like a team but a larger team. Could you expand on that a little? How that works and what sort of synergies you see there?
Yeah. Are you familiar with YPO, Young Presidents Organization, or YEO? These are companies that
no.
You say again?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay. So there are these businesses that basically set up peer support groups. Okay. And effectively that's what happens with the Techstars cohort. So the founders spend a lot of time together and they wind up being very helpful to each other because, even at their early stages, they wind up having a lot of their own experiences, their own skills, and they're all going through the same struggles. So again, having a peer network to whom they can, unburden, share their challenges with or go to for counsel, in addition to all the mentorship that they get, it's just very nice to have a group of, there are 9 other CEOs and, usually 20 to 25 co-founders who you get to know really quite well during the course of the program. And in Techstars' case, wind up staying attached for oftentimes years afterwards. I mean, the founder cohorts from the last 2 programs that I ran, they still meet once a month. And sometimes it's just to shoot the shit. Sometimes they'll set a specific topic up that they want to talk about and, get best practices on. A lot of times they're exchanging leads or investor contacts. So the groups just tend to be really mutually supportive of each other and hang out together for a long time. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay. All right, well, so moving off of team, and I'm happy to go back to that if a question pops in someone's head. So market opportunity, just a few words on this. So we at Techstars, but I think this is true of most early stage investors, we do want to invest in big venture scale businesses. Okay. And my rough rule of thumb is you ought to have a credible story about how you can get to become a $50 to $100 million recurring revenue business in 7 to 10 years. Okay. If the market is not big enough to support a business like that, or the only way that that's going to happen is if you have 50% market share, it's probably not a big enough market opportunity. Okay. Now, by the way, it doesn't mean that you can't build a great bootstrapped company. Okay. Some of the happiest people I know are people who own $10, $20 million bootstrap software companies with minimal outside investors and who own the vast majority of the business, and they do whatever they want. They pay themselves nicely. They live good lifestyles. And a lot of times they wind up making every bit as much money as a venture-backed founder. That's just not what I will bring into Techstars, at least not intentionally. So you need to have a big enough market opportunity to support a company like that. I hate it when people show up with a top-down. Gartner says that this is an $8 billion market. I don't care about that. What I want you to be able to do is, it's really simple. Do a bottoms-up build. How many customers are there who could buy your stuff, and how much will they pay you per year? Okay, and that'll tell us roughly how big the market is. Now, beyond that, I also want to see that there's some thoughtfulness around segmentation. I'm sure people have heard things like TAM, SAM, and SOM. Look it up if you haven't, but those are ways that's a framework for thinking about relevant segments to what you're doing. Because you might start with the total available market is really, really big, but today I can only sell to a small segment of it. That's okay if you can convince me that eventually you'll be able to service the broader market. So you might say, on day one, we're only going to be serving West Coast SaaS businesses, but quickly we'll serve domestic businesses. And anyway, the point is, I want to see that you understand your customer base. You're not, you're starting, you have a big market, but you are segmented about it, and you can give me a bottoms up build on the market. Okay. I want to understand customer dynamics. I typically like it when there are more customers. And I don't know, to go back to like a really old framework around competitive, Michael Porter's stuff, you want there to be a lot of customers and relatively few people doing what you're doing in the ideal setup. Every now and then I'll see, for example, a big market, but there are only really 10 or 20 or 30 large buyers. I hate that kind of setup. Because if you don't land, a few of them, you have to land a few of them, and you're going to have something called customer concentration, which you really don't want, because it means that if you lose one customer, you could lose 20% of your business or 30% of your business. I'd rather see that you have, hundreds of thousands of potential customers. You either should be disrupting a large staid industry with a really disruptive tech or product or business model approach. So like a lot of insure tech companies are selling into big marketplaces. Those markets might not be growing that fast, but you've got an approach that's going to allow you to quickly steal market share from the traditional incumbents, or you're selling into a rapidly growing marketplace that doesn't really exist. That's oftentimes a harder bet, but a good example of that is, hey, I'm selling into autonomous vehicles. Okay, well, that is a market that, pretty reasonable bet it's going to turn out to become a big market. So I might place a bet on that, even if today the number of people you could sell to is pretty small. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. I want to see that you're addressing either severe pain or really serious lust. Okay, and so if you haven't heard the cliche, I want to invest in companies that are doing aspirin, not vitamins. Lots and lots of companies, their products or services are nice to have. Okay, and I don't like those companies because they tend not to grow as fast or they tend to have high churn. I want to see companies that are solving a real severe pain point, or if they're doing something on the consumer side, something that consumers, lust after from a luxury perspective, something that they just really, really, really want. Okay, and so I want there to be strong emotion from the customer, whether it's a consumer or business, about the thing that the startup is doing. And I'd rather see you have 100 customers who are passionate about what you're doing than 10,000 customers who are kind of like, oh, that's pretty cool what they're doing, but sort of take it or leave it. I don't really care. Because usually if you can find 100 customers who love what you're doing, they're probably 1,000. And if they're 1,000, they're probably 10,000. So that matters. Competitive dynamics matter a lot. Like if there are, tons and tons of people doing the same thing and you're competing, it's just going to be harder for you. And it's just harder to invest in an early stage company where I know, hey, there are 10 other people who are trying to do the exact same thing. And that relates very much to the next point. And this is really true if you're an angel. If there are already VCs making big bets in a space that a founding team shows up to, you might be too late. There's a good chance you're too late already. Okay. Not always, but like I see many people chase after what the latest VC announcement. Oh, this company just raised $200 million. All right, well, I'm going to go start one just like it. Okay, well, you're probably a little late. It's just something to think about. Okay. John asked, I see going back to some team stuff. Sometimes we get investors asking us, why don't we use Myers-Briggs SDI style personality tests to evaluate teams? How do I actually evaluate a team? Why not use different psych tools? Good question, John. I think about that quite a bit. I actually really like a tool called IMAP. I've never forced a company to do it before I invested in them, because usually like I will have smelled a problem. And so it's not even, there's almost no point in doing it at that stage. Every once in a while I could say, gosh, I sure wish I'd had them do that. And I might have like picked out a co-founder dynamics problem or whatever. Part of it probably relates to something I'm going to talk about in terms of my own style of angel investing, but I try to make decisions quickly and I try not to be a burden. And that is a burdensome thing to do. Okay. So I'm already asking them a lot of questions and trying to do some degree of due diligence. And if I then say, hey, by the way, take this test. Okay. I don't think that's a particularly founder-friendly thing to do. And I guess at this point, I try to trust my own experience and instinct about teams. But all that said, I have an executive coach who I bring into the program who works with all my teams. And the first thing we do when they come in is we take this IMAP test to really figure out where a team's likely to run into problems and how can they work at it. Okay. And, hey, John, you're my co-founder. I know that you really get stressed out in these types of circumstances, and this is your default behavior when that happens. So I'm going to be aware of that. I'm going to have an eye out for it. And the coach will say, and here are things that I could do to help you in that situation, and vice versa. Okay. I still think about doing it sometimes though. John, like, hey, maybe I should have a team do it. Maybe the day will come where there's a company I really, really like, but I have a real concern about some team psych dynamic. And I say, hey, take this test, please. But I haven't done it yet. I think there are some investors that do, but again, I think it's burdensome. I think one of the great things about Techstars, the Founders Network. Yeah, just briefly on that point, when you join Techstars, you become a member of Techstars for life. And there are thousands and thousands of alumni founders who live in every part of the world, who have every type of expertise in every industry. And the really good founders are good at leveraging that network. But, let's say you're thinking about opening up business in Europe, you'll go to London for a, exploratory trip. There will be tons of founders who will be there to meet you. It's a super important part of our value prop. What are the 3 reasons why applicants don't get accepted to Techstars? Well, usually it's because I don't think the team's very good. B, I think the market opportunity isn't good. Or I guess that's a good time to talk about traction. Or there's so little there, and I have so many doubts about either the team or the market or the way they're going about it, and they don't have any traction. So I just can't get conviction that it's there. Maybe it's because I don't know enough about what they're doing. So the thing that traction does, okay, so to go back to an earlier question, what are the markers for traction, like minimum kind of progress for Techstars specifically? Again, most companies at the early stage are approaching, they should be pushing out an MVP soon after the program starts. Like if you don't have something to show customers, you're probably a little too early to really benefit from the program. We're an accelerator, not an incubator. So I want you to have identified the problem that you're trying to solve and have started building towards it. That's on the earliest side. And again, there are some companies that'll show. There was a company in the last cohort that had $1 million of bookings trailing. Okay, that's pretty advanced, but we do get that. And there are lots of companies that'll have, you know, $5,000, $10,000 of MRR, and that's quite a common configuration. What Traction, though, allows me as an investor to do is it answers questions. Like, let's say you show up as a solopreneur, you're clearly a great business person, you know how to pitch, but boy, I'm not sure you can build this product that you're talking about. Well, if you have built it, even if it's with a contract development team, then I can say, okay, hey, this person can at least get a start on building. Maybe it's, hey, I think you know how to build product, but I'm really not sure you can sell. Well, if you have a customer, then I know you can sell to some degree, right? And so Traction just answers those questions. One thing that I cannot stand that is the bane of many founders is they go to talk to an investor and the investor says, you're too early for me. And then you look at their portfolio and you're like, wait a minute. Or I know last week you invested in, you know, we have $1,000 of MRR, and I know last week you invested in a team that hasn't even launched their product yet. How can you say we're too early? Okay, it's a dishonest response from an investor. What they should really be saying is, you're too early for me to get conviction about what you're doing, either because I don't know enough about you or your market opportunity, or I just have like really serious doubts that you can do what you say you're going to do. Okay. And yeah, I backed that team that hasn't launched because I've worked with them before, or I have seen them build product from a distance before. And so I actually am comfortable with that. Whereas in your case, I'm not really sure that you can do it. But saying, oh, you're just too early is disingenuous. Angels should never say it's too early. They should say, I just don't know enough about what you're doing, or you don't have enough traction for me to get conviction that this is right for me. Okay? Don't put the burden on the founder. Put it on yourself. That makes sense? That's a controversial statement that I just made. Yeah, Megan, you kind of said it right. It's not you, it's me. I mean, the answer is, I couldn't, for the stage that you are right now, I can't get conviction about you or your market opportunity or the way you're doing things. Yeah, or John, or I don't believe enough in the foundations you've built. Yeah, I mean, look, you have to, look, it's tricky as an investor. You hate calling someone's kids ugly. And you certainly hate saying, I'm not really sure you're the founder that I want to back. Okay. In fact, you probably shouldn't do that because it's insulting. But generally speaking, I try to advise transparency. I think the best investors give founders really good, detail when they're turning down a company. Okay. Here's why I'm not able to invest at this point in time. I'm not sure about this, this, and this. Okay. All right. So let me just talk about my own approach to doing all this stuff. Let me be really clear that this is a very personal set of sort of guidelines and biases, and it's not the only way to do this. It certainly may not be the right way to do this. It's just the way that I do it. Okay. So for starters, when I angel invest, and I'm a pretty active angel, emotionally, I write it down to 0 the second I send the wire. Okay. It doesn't mean that I don't want or hope that the company turns into a gigantic unicorn and makes me a bunch of money. It's just that I know that the odds of it happening are very low. And the time frame that it's going to take, if I do, and if the company does succeed, is very, very long. In fact, the more successful the company it is, the longer it's going to take to exit, because the really good companies these days avoid exiting, or they avoid going public or getting sold for a decade or more. And I should be really comfortable with that. So what it means, though, is I'm not going to see any liquidity potentially for a decade or more. So like, I just don't even, like, it's money that I can afford to lose. I don't factor it into my net worth calculations, and I'm not sitting there worrying about it. So like emotionally, it's written off. If it turns into something good, great, but I write it down to zero because I basically don't want to care too much about that money because it's not like my house. It's not a liquid stock that I can sell if I need the money. It's not let alone a debt security. The founder has no obligation to return it to me. I just hope that they do a great job. So I literally write it down to zero the second that I send the wire. I really try hard to only invest where I have informational asymmetry. Okay, and what I mean by that is I should have a lot of conviction that I know more than the average investor about this company and this founding team. And it gets to some of my next points, but either I have a real understanding or network in the thing that they're trying to do. So like I recently invested in a company that's selling into, it's a machine learning business that's selling into, among other markets, the autonomous vehicle space. I know a lot about that. Okay. And so I'm better capable than the vast majority of investors out there of evaluating this founder and their approach to the market. Okay. Occasionally I will not know so much about something, but I've been brought in by great co-investors, people who I know are strong investors, who I know aren't taking advantage of me and who I trust. That happens every now and then. And then the unfair advantage that I have as an MD at Techstars is I have longitudinal data. Okay, so I actually get to see founders perform for a long time in a lot of cases before I make an investment decision. Okay, I have major informational asymmetry there, right? Because I see how the companies perform from when I recruit them into the program and as they go through the program. And so I know a lot more about that team and founder than people who are talking to them for the first time. In fact, there's a great statement from, I think it's Jeff Clavier, a well-known early stage investor. He's like, I invest in lines, not dots. Okay. So he likes to invest in companies where he's had a chance to see them evolve. And if you have insight into that, it's a great way, it's a nice way to invest. In most cases, I certainly am more than a checkbook. There should be a good reason why I'm in this deal. Okay. If the founder thinks of me as no more than a check, I'm probably not going to do it. And you should always ask yourself, John, you and I have talked about this. Why are you at the table here as an angel? Like, why, are you the schmuck in the room here because nobody else wanted to touch this company? Okay. If that's the case, you probably don't want to invest. There should be a good reason why you've been invited to invest in this company. And certainly also furthermore, if all the founder views me as a source of capital, there's a higher chance than average that they're going to abuse me as an investor. All right. Like they have to want me there for more than my money, and they have to view me as a person. Okay. I try to make quick decisions. Probably when it comes to angel investing, I make 2 quick decisions in some cases, but you have to do it, number one, because that's just what the market commands these days. Long, drawn-out decision-making processes don't play well with founders, and you're not going to get into great deals if you take a long time. Leave them the F alone. All right. I think I'm a highly value-added investor. I think there are not too many people who have as much value to add to companies that are going from 0 to 1. But again, this ties into the point 2 bullets above. I only invest in companies where people want me there because they think I can help them. But otherwise, I stay the hell out of their way. Okay. As a founder, I never liked intrusive, annoying, or controlling or worried investors. All right. I want investors who are helpful when I need them, but who largely stay out of my way. Okay. Great when they come to me with ideas, for resources, network contacts, or ideas about the business, but they're not intrusive. Again, I think the success of a company, 98% resides on the founder, not the investor or the advisors or the board. Okay. So I really they know that I'm available, and most of them wind up, reaching out for my perspective and my counsel a lot. but I certainly don't call them going, hey, give me a, update me. No, and I strongly advise my founders to do their diligence on investors to make sure that they're not taking in people who are worried. Okay, they have to have people who are seasoned investors who know that the startup journey is rarely upward to the right, but it's much more of a roller coaster, and who are going to be supportive and helpful and not panic and not constantly be in their shorts. And lastly, I only back people I like. I mean, and that's just again, I probably make a lot more money if I backed a certain class of really arrogant founder, but for me, life is too short, and I want to invest in people whose company I enjoy. So that's my own very biased view of the world of angel investing. It's how I do it. By no means should you take it as the way that you should do it, because there are all kinds of ways to do this, but that's how I do it. I think that's it. That's all I had. What else can I tell you? Other questions?
I think that the founders gathering that you do every year, or at least did every year, really is transformative for a lot of companies. I don't think people really understand how powerful it is to have 500 founders of Techstars companies all to.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, your founders network is great, but you gather them, which is even better, right? And so there's a certain amount of magic that happens in that space that I'd like you to dive into.
Yeah, sorry, you know what, John? I've never been to one because the last time we were going to have one, COVID hit. So I do hear that they are amazing. We had virtual ones this past year. I don't think they were nearly as good as the in-person ones. Yeah. Sorry. Yes. Sorry, John. How much more time do you think we're going to have?
As much time as you want.
Okay. If I could. Oh, sorry. Never mind. Okay, I'm good. Go ahead. Sorry, I was going to do an airport run, but I'll now I'm relaxed. So. Oh, they can go. They can do that. I can put on my headphones. They can do it. Do it. Okay. Sorry, everybody. I've working at home. So but FounderCon is supposedly brilliant. I just haven't been.
Yeah, all right. I thought it was wonderful. I want to go back into the team a little bit more because, people are these little queer, squishy things with all sorts of sharp edges and stuff. And you talked about conflict resolution, but you're also talking about, a certain amount of dynamics about how teams engage in things that are hard and they're risking a lot, right? There's a lot of stress and there's a lot of personal growth opportunities in startups that are really hard to find in other places as easily as you get them in startups. So, I go and I research, and I've got a bunch of guys from, really great universities, and they're seemingly committed, but they don't actually function as a team. They function as a bunch of really bright guys from different colleges, right?
Yeah.
So is that all interpreted by your little Spidey sense intuitive thing, or are there other things that you're looking for? And more importantly, as SAC people are engaging with these companies that are, even a step earlier than the companies that you're looking at in some ways, they have more squishy teams than you're willing to accept in some ways. So we're in this job of not only seeing the patterns, but then trying to coach them into some level of stability. Yeah. So can you talk at least about your intuitions around what makes a team functional?
Yeah. So it's not all Spidey sense. I think it's a big part of it just because I've seen a lot of teams. And you can, a lot of times I think I just pick up on when, hey, there's something unhealthy going on here. Here's an example of something that's unhealthy. When I'm interviewing co-founders and they're constantly talking over each other, that's a problem. Okay. That's like a very objective thing. if I have a co-founding team on the phone and they're constantly cutting each other off and stumbling over each other, pretty good sign that they don't have a good communication dynamic. Okay. This gets to Sukanya's question, actually, like past history work experience. One of the things when I have a co-founding team is not that I won't take a relatively newly formed team, but I really love it when, hey, we worked together at this company and we came up with this idea. We loved it so much that we both left together after having worked together. So there's a team in the last cohort called Bright. They were their classic configuration, a business person and a developer who'd been at Amazon Education for a number of years, had left and started a coding academy together, and then started this SaaS business together, selling into the education space. Like, chances are that's a team that likes each other. Like, if they've been together that long, they probably know how to work together. They probably know how to fight in a healthy way. You know, that's a good sign. Okay. How do I evaluate a team that's just come together? It's a lot harder. But I'll certainly ask them, okay, have you thought about a number of objective factors here, like around how are you going to resolve disagreements? What happens if one of you, for whatever reason, has to leave the company? Okay, have you thought about that? And there's somewhere there's a toolkit out there for, sort of the founders checklist about the conversations that founders should have before they agree to go into business together, around, how equity is split, how decisions are made, this, that, and the other, around roles. What's going to happen if someone kind of runs out of runway developmentally and we have to hire above you? That happens all the time. Okay. CEO's great until the company gets to $5 million in revenue. And after that, they're just not equipped. Okay. Well, are we willing to bring in a higher CEO over them, even though they're the founding CEO? Okay. Have people had those kinds of conversations, and do they have agreement on what they have? So let's see. Megan, you said, I love learning from failure. What's something you'd really fucked up that informs how I invest now? Question. I think it was a good outcome. Our first business, this 3D graphic software business, was a good outcome, relatively speaking. It wasn't like a huge thing, but we made money for our investors, and I was able to buy my first condo with the proceeds. But my brother and I did not have any kind of founder market fit or understanding of that market. And so I think we, A, might not have started that business if we really did, or B, we would have certainly been much more effective at it if we did. So again, that helps a lot. By the way, one thing we got right there was, family businesses are either the best or the worst. And I had a really clear agreement with my brother about what would happen if we ever got to a loggerheads where we got to an impasse around an important decision about, and one of us would leave the company. What else? There are so many failures, so many bad investments. I'll give you a very Techstars specific one, Megan. So one of the final steps in making a decision, where we pick our 10 finalist companies, is we have the 20 finalists come in and present to a screening committee of early stage investors. And I had a team. So I had a team where I did have, my Spidey sense was kind of going off. I'm like, ooh, I'm not sure. I think there's some unhealthy things here. But I hadn't seen anything really, really concrete. And there was a lot to like about them. But I definitely had my suspicions. And but the screening committee, which is composed of some of the best, most successful early stage investors here in Seattle, loved the team. They're like, they're great. You got to do this, And so I took them. And sure enough, I was right. They were wrong. And so one of the things is, like, I should have trusted my instincts, but the objective reason why I should have trusted my instincts there is they were making their decision based on a 20-minute pitch. I had met this team multiple times over a handful of collective hours. So I knew more about them as people And as a team, then the screening committee did, despite the fact that they're incredibly good investors. First impressions can be deceiving, right? So that's a good example of a failure as an investor. So again, I think like particularly when it comes to evaluating team and people, there's nothing like time. And again, I encourage people to really make decisions quickly, but it's better if you've known the founder for a while. At the very least, take them out to a dinner, get to know them as people, maybe have a couple drinks with them if you are a drinker, and let things loosen up and see what they say. I always, by the way, like when I interview people, including companies, founders, the first thing I'll say is just tell me about yourself. And then I shut up. Okay. And I see, it's amazing how many people will talk themselves into a ditch if you just be quiet and let them talk without peppering them with questions. So that's one thing. Let's see. Early health tech. And sorry, my mouse just died here. Jane says, give us your thoughts on early health tech, digital health companies specifically, huge fund. Well, I mean, obviously it's a big viable market. Markets go in and out of vogue. And we're investing for a decade. Okay. So even if you invest in something that's totally smoking hot right now, 3 years from now, it might be kind of dead. But if the market is big enough and the founding team is big enough, even if their stuff goes out of vogue, they'll build a good company and it'll eventually be big enough. So is digital health a significant marketplace that is rife for disruption in many, many sectors? Of course it is. Right now, there's a lot going on. I think you might be the one who was at Livongo. Former colleague of mine, Hemant Taneja, was the sort of founding investor there. It was an incredible outcome. I don't know if you were an early employee there, you probably made a shit ton of money.
Not early, but before we went public, yeah.
Yeah. So, but there have been times in the not too distant past where many, big segment of the investor world wouldn't touch healthcare. Okay. So I think you have to, again, if you know something about healthcare, you should invest in healthcare companies, understanding that, yes, it may go in or out of vogue. There may be times when it's harder to raise money, but people need healthcare. It's one of the biggest markets in the world in terms of just sheer spend. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And of course, there's always technology that can be applied to it. That's, many things that are just kind of early. So, I think it's interesting. Obviously, it depends on the segment. There's, I see all kinds of, here's a sector that I'm a little concerned about. The number of like telemedicine, digital mental health and wellness companies that are out there. Like, oh my God, they're like, they're like weeds. There's so many of them. And there are probably plenty of great ones. It's just at this early stage, I have a really hard time in assessing which one's going to be better than the other. Now, if there's a really highly qualified team that shows up and says, we have a novel twist on it, and they have a credible story about why their approach is unique, okay, well, maybe I'll give it a shot. But by the way, I'd love to see some traction, see if what they're saying is really true. So there are certainly segments there that are getting quite crowded, but that's true of most markets these days. Okay. How about founders with the same skill set and lack certain ones, say building? Complete write-off if they hired out the build to get an MVP going. That helps us, I'm assuming. Sorry, I have such a frog today. Follow-up, is the number of founders greater than 2? Any concerns? Like I said, I've really opened my filter on solo founders who are almost by definition going to be lacking in some skill set. If you have 2 founders who have exactly the same skill set, number one, I want to make sure that there's a clear division of responsibility and they aren't going to be stepping on each other's toes or constantly fighting. And then the question is, can they fill in their gaps quickly? But I've certainly backed companies that have somewhat duplicative or overlapping skill sets. I backed a great computer vision team in the last cohort. All three of the founders were highly technical founders who lacked that can you pitch to a large degree. And I'm glad I backed it because I like highly technical teams. There's some innate value just in that, but I think they're slower getting out of the gates than they would be if they'd had a co-founder who was a really good salesperson. Because the CEO is learning how to sell, and they've hired a good sort of lead salesperson, which has helped a lot. But I think they might have gone faster if they knew a lot more about the sales process. And remember, your job as a CEO, you're always selling as a CEO, whether it's to convince employees to get on board with your vision, to raise capital, and certainly to customers. So it's a good team. I'm glad I'm an investor. They've actually done a nice job of raising capital, all things considered. But I do certainly wonder, and I would say this if they were sitting on this call, could they have gone faster if they had had that pitching DNA a little stronger? My guess is probably yes. Sometimes not. I mean, if the market's just slow to evolve, you can be the best salesperson in the world and the customers just aren't ready to buy, right? And then greater than two, yeah, I mean, I think 2-3 person teams are oftentimes the ideal configuration for the stage. If you start to have 5 co-founders, then I get a little concerned because, again, the odds that all 5 are going to make it for a good number of years is pretty low, and they better have a really clear founders agreement about what happens when one or more of them drop off. And then furthermore, the odds that that they're all going to stay relevant and senior in the company is also pretty low. Odds for fighting are higher. It just depends. I would never say never. I don't think I've backed a 5-person co-founding team. Certainly some 3s. I'm trying to think if I've had any 4s at Techstars. I don't think so. Okay. How do I feel about this new generation of no-code tools? Certainly interesting, and certainly a great way to get a company started, especially if you're a non-technical founder. Do I think that you're going to build a huge company on a no-code tool? Sooner or later, somebody will do it, but I still think we're probably in the phase where eventually you need to have your own development teams. But I could be proven wrong on that one. I don't know. I mean, I think it's only a good thing for startups, right? Anything that makes it easier to start a company is good for me. Look, I mean, not so long ago, cloud computing was a novel way that made it starting a company a lot easier. So great. Anything that makes starting a company easier is going to be good for me. But I think, again, these days, at least right now, most companies can get started on it. Eventually, they're gonna need to hire, some degree of internal technical capability. But every year you see companies go further and further with outsourced development capabilities. A lot of it depends on what they're doing. Like if you're trying to do a business model disruption, then you could probably go a long, long way without having, a significant internal development team. But I start to get worried about you making the wrong decisions around architecture or doing something that eventually throttles back your scaling capability. Our architecture does matter. Our technical architecture does matter eventually, and you can lots and lots of ways to do it wrong. So just depends. Or you'll wind up in a ton of tech debt, having to take 6 months to slow down to rewrite your code base or whatever. So, and of course, a lot of those low-code, no-code tools are not just for startups, but they're for business users at big enterprise too. So that's a very big universe right now, right? What else?
And any other thoughts from folks?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Isaac, is there any type of way of getting feedback from a Techstars application that never transpired? You get a form feedback that says nope, but there's really nothing.
Yeah, it
Comes back.
again, like get to know the MD. Okay, so again, we're pretty accessible. We all have office hours, and you know, if I know you and I want to turn you down, first of all, I'll try to give you a pretty clear read. So yeah, let me do a little commercial right now. I am recruiting for the next Techstars Seattle class. I'd love any and all referrals, and if you're thinking about it, by all means, please connect with me. My email, I'll put it in the chat, is isaac.techstars.com. I'm generally really widely available. But you know, one piece of advice I have for people who are actually genuinely interested in applying is apply early and apply often. The single biggest group of people who get into Techstars are people who have applied before. It is a highly competitive process, as I said earlier. But the good news is you can apply to two programs 6 times a year right now. And I've heard stories. I think there was one company recently I heard of that had applied 13 times. But don't get discouraged, okay? You know, one thing, by applying early and reapplying, you build up traction. So you make it easier for us to answer the questions that we have about your company. And the other thing that's happened is, thanks to COVID, I think many programs, certainly mine, have now started to offer hybrid options where you don't have to necessarily go in person, or you don't have to go in person the full time, which makes it much, much, much easier to say, go to Techstars New York, or for someone in New York to come to Techstars Seattle. So anyway, but by all means, please apply. Tell your friends to apply. I'm looking for great founders doing really interesting things. What else? Let's see. But yeah, so the way to get feedback though is get to know the founder before you, or the MD before you apply if you can. So we feel some degree of personal connection with you and we feel more inclined to help you out. We do get, you know, if all you've done is apply and you haven't talked to the MD, it won't surprise me if you don't get detailed feedback, because at least, you know, a lot of our programs will get hundreds of applicants and we just don't have the time, unfortunately. Okay. And again, every MD is a bit different. So someone might turn you down because they just don't have much interest in what you're doing. They don't understand the space, or they might feel like you're not a good founder for what's going on, or they might just say, I don't know enough about this, so I want to see more traction. You know, any number of things. Or maybe you're a solo founder, and there are definitely Techstars MDs who really will not back solo founders. I definitely will hold the solo founder to a higher bar. Like, you've really got to show me stuff, you know, whereas a really brilliant team with amazing founder market fit that's super early in their product development journey, but they've done it before, they have a higher likelihood of getting in for sure than a solo founder at the same stage of company.
No, I think you answered a lot of the questions about the solo founder and traction and them being leaving their, you know, the job and being full-time into it. I think that was where I had the most questions around trying to balance corporate job and the startup.
Yeah.
It just sounds like you're not ready for Techstars if you're in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, if you're still part-time, again, I realize this excludes a number of people who have the potential to be great founders. It's just, I can't point to examples of startup, you know, companies that are part-time startups that are hugely successful. Many will start that way, and once the founders go full-time, then they're relevant. But here's the other thing I would say, okay, again, this is for Techstars specifically versus angel investing. It's a huge commitment, and you're giving up 6% of your company when you come in. You ought to want to get the maximum benefit from it. And if you are already like struggling to find time to do your day job and run your side hustle, you don't have the time to do Techstars. It is an intensive program, and you're not going to benefit from it nearly as much as someone who's all in.
Okay. I guess my thought was, when I got accepted into Techstars, I would go full time.
Right.
And until then, I would do part time on each.
Sure. And like I said, a number of companies use getting into Techstars as the trigger to go full time. You need to have an open and direct conversation with the MD whose program you're applying to say, hey, I will do this, and they have to believe that you really will do it.
Mm-hmm.
You get up to $120,000, which is a lot of times the seed capital that lets you say, okay, I'm ready to take the plunge, and the market has validated what I'm doing, right? So it just depends.
Thank you.
So one of the things that I've noticed about startups is that the founding team sort of has to build, there are inflection points in the growth structure of the company that after you get beyond certain points, the personality of your founding team has to evolve significantly. And by the time you get to the $50 million range, you've got a lot of employees and you've got a lot of internal structure, and you've switched from personality management to doing things by process, and you have written things down, all sorts of things that have to change to make that happen. How do you see or measure the founders that are capable of that personal transformation?
Yeah. Well, it's hard, and a lot of them aren't. And so then I just want to make sure that, hey, are they more committed to the success of the business, or are they more committed to their own personal, sort of title and place in the company? And that's a hard one. But sometimes it's hard questions around, okay, hey, what are you going to do if you're no longer the best CEO? And many founders will just volunteer, hey, as soon as I'm not the best person for this job, I will step aside, which is the right thing to say, in my opinion. I mean, look, one type of traction is, okay, who have you hired so far? Are you hiring? Have you hired a handful of great people? Can you attract people? I'd love to, based on what you've done before, have you ever led teams of people before? Okay. And have they been successful? That's a really helpful thing to show me. But I have plenty of founders who are 24, 25 and who just haven't had that opportunity yet. So then I have to kind of guess, but I'll ask questions. Tell me about your leadership style. Tell me about a problem that you've had with an employee. Because again, the part of being a great team is the ability to hire great people, set goals, achieve those goals, and manage and inspire that team to hit your collective goals. So again, one piece of traction is showing me you can hire people. A lot of people struggle with it. But John, do I know that you're going to be a great CEO when you get to Series B at this stage? Hell no, unless you've done it before. I don't. I've never led a company of more than 100 people. I had no idea if I scale beyond that.
Yep, I'm sure I don't. So I learned that lesson already. All right, anybody else got questions?